Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom and today I'm going to be showing you how to create this modal window right here using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Okay, now the source code for this is going to be linked below if you want to download and follow along, and also the close buttons and the confirm button down here do in fact work, and you can customize the buttons which get displayed down below. Now, going inside this tab right here, let's begin from scratch to create what we just saw. Going inside the HTML, I want to first show you the HTML and the CSS before moving on to the JavaScript, okay? So the first step here is going to be to create a new div with a class of modal, and this represents the entire modal visible area, including the opaque black background. Then inside here, a second div with a class of modal __ inner. This is the inner section of the modal. It's going to contain the title, the main content, and the bottom bar with all of the buttons, okay? So let's stop here and go inside the CSS and apply some styles. So for the modal itself, we're going to be assigning a CSS property called gap, and we're going to be reusing this variable or property throughout the entirety of our code. We can then also give this a position of fixed, which allows it to be positioned on top of everything else on the page, and a top of 0, a left of 0, a width of 100 VW, and a height of 100 VH. So these two right here allow the modal to be, to take up the entire width and height of the visible area of the screen. Okay. I'm also going to be setting a display of flex here, alongside an align items of center and a justify content of center. These three allow the inner section of the modal to be vertically and horizontally centered. So now I'm going to save this, go back in the HTML, add some sample content inside the inner section. I'm going to save this right here, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this. As we can see, we have the modal, then of course the modal inner, which is vertically and horizontally centered using that flex like we saw earlier. Okay, we're also going to be setting here just a box sizing of border box. This allows us to then assign some padding. Let's go for using the gap variable right there, and also a background of RGBA 000, then 0.5 for a 50% opaque black background. So now saving this right here, going back in the browser, as we can see upon refreshing, we have something like this. So now it's going to be to style up the inner section to make it look a lot nicer. So going back inside here, let's target the modal __ inner. So for this one, we're going to be assigning a background of white, okay, as well as a width of 100% and a maximum width of 800 px. So these two properties here are going to allow it to be responsive as we go down to smaller screen sizes. So saving this right here, going back in the browser, refreshing, we can see we get something like this. As we can see, it's going to be responsive and then cap out at 800 px right there. If I go down to a smaller phone size screen, we can see that our padding, which we set on the modal, is coming into play, and we have that gap on the left and right side right there. So next step is going to be to add some curved borders. So we can give this an overflow here of hidden alongside a border radius of 4px. So these two right here are going to allow us to have a smooth or curved border. Saving this, going back in the browser, refresh, and we have those curved borders on our inner modal section. Next up, let's go back in the HTML and work on the title section or the top section of our modal window. So the first step here is going to actually be to go back in the browser and just do a search for Google material icons. Okay, so I'll be leaving a link to this down below if you want to, of course, check it out. But basically, this is Google's free material icon library. So what you can do is you can just go to the section here, the developer guide, and you can just go down to the section where it says icon font for the web. Once again, I'll leave a link to this below. And you just simply copy the link right here and go back in your HTML and just include it inside the head. So now, with this included, you can start to make use of the Google Material Icon library, and we're going to be needing that for the close button icon, the little X, okay? So we'll get to that very shortly, but going back in the HTML, let's make a new div here called modal __ top, and this right here is going to hold both the title and the close button. So now, within this, we can make a new div called modal __ title, and we can say something like sample modal title. Then down below, let's make a button, okay, with a type of button and a class of modal __ close. So now inside this close button, we're going to be specifying the Google Material Icon. With this being said, we can say right inside here, span with a class of material-icons, then we can write close inside here. How does this work? If we go back to the icon library or the web page right here, do a search for close, we can see that we've got this close icon, and the actual identifier for it in the bottom right is going to be close, which is why I'm typing out close inside this span. So now, with these two things added, if I save this, go back in the browser, refresh, we get something like this. So now it's going to be simply the case of moving our button to the right side and of course making it look a lot nicer than it currently is. So let's go back inside the CSS now. Let's target the class of modal __ top. So for our top section, we're going to be displaying this as a flex. This is so we can then position the close button to the right side of our title. Okay, so we can also say align items of center to vertically align our title and the button, and give this a background of, let's just do a light gray, EEE and EEE. There we go. Saving this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we have something like this. And now it's going to be as simple as just essentially making this title take up the remaining space of our top section. So back inside here, let's target the modal __ title. For this, we can say flex grow and then 1, and it's going to take up the remaining space in the title section, or in the top section. Okay, give this a padding of 0, top and bottom, and then we're going to be using the gap property there for the left and right. So basically 15px on left and right, and also a font size of 20px for our title. Let's save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get something like this. So I just want to then also just change what the actual font is for our entire modal. So let me just go back to the top up here and just give a font family of sans serif. You can of course put whatever font you want inside here. Save this, back in the browser, refresh, and it is now a much nicer font to look at in my opinion. Cool. So next up, we're going to style up the button to close the modal. So for this, back in the CSS, let's target the modal __ button. So sorry, not button, this needs to be close. So modal __ close. So for our close button, let's give this a display of flex and an align items of center. This right here is going to make sure that the Google Material Icon is actually vertically centered in the button. So if I save this right here, look at the close icon right here, refresh, it is now centered. There we go. Next up, we're going to be giving this a cursor of pointer, a padding using once again the gap, okay, a background of none so it goes right through, a border of none, then lastly an outline of none. Let's save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we have something like this. There we go, it looks a lot nicer. Next up, we've got the main content of the modal, all of this stuff inside here. So for that, if we go back in the HTML, it's going to be very straightforward. So it's going to be a div with a class of modal __ content. So for this one here, we're going to be inside the CSS. So back in the CSS, we're going to say modal __ content for this class right here. Let's give this a padding of 0, top and bottom, and then once again using our gap for the left and right. Now this right here is optional because I'm going to be using a paragraph tag inside my content. The margining of the paragraph is going to take care of my top and bottom spacing, but you can optionally just have all sides here have our 15px gap padding. But in my case, let's make this 0 top and bottom. We can also give this a line height of 1.5, and now if we just now add some text, for example a paragraph, add some lorem ipsum, and then just go back, save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we have something like this. So like I said guys, you can play around with your spacing and use margin or padding, whatever you want to do. Okay, now next up we've got the bottom section of the modal. So going back in the HTML, let's make a new div called modal __ bottom. So for this right here, we're also going to need our button to then say confirm or whatever our button ends up being. So for this, let's make a new button, once again with a type of button, this time using a class of modal __ button. So this represents a generic button on the bottom of the modal. Inside here we can then say, for example, got it, something like that, right? Saving this, go back in the browser, and we have something like this. So now let's apply some styles to the bottom section as well as the button itself. So going back inside here in the CSS, let's target the class of modal __ bottom. So this of course represents the entire bottom section, basically the button container. Let's give this a text align of right, okay, and some padding. We're going to say 0 for the top, and then basically everything else is going to have a padding of 15px or our gap. So basically it goes top, right, bottom, and then left. Okay, save this, back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here. Not too bad, but now of course let's apply some styles to the actual button itself. So going back inside here, let's target the class of modal __ button, and for these ones, a display of inline block is going to allow, being that it's actually inline, it's going to allow the text align to then still work. Okay, we're going to give this a padding of 6px top and bottom, and then 12px left and right, and a background here of 009578, that is the decode green color. Let's give this no border and also no outline. A border radius of, let's just do 3px for our rounded corners. A text color of white. Okay, a cursor of pointer once again. Then lastly down here we can just give this a font size of 18px. Save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we have the button right there. Optionally, you can also include just a hover state. So let's copy this, go down here, and we're going to say on the button hover, I'm going to give this a darker background. I'm going to be applying 008066 for a darker version of that green. Saving this, going back in the browser, refreshing, we have our background color right there. So we are done with the HTML and the CSS for the modal window. We now need to essentially transfer this HTML into the JavaScript instead. That way you can use some JavaScript code to then call your modal and make it appear. So with that being said, we can now comment out this HTML and simply use it for reference. Once we're done, we can remove it altogether. But for now, let's just comment it out. So now, going inside the JavaScript right up here, we're going to be creating a new function. Okay, this is going to be called show modal. It's going to take in a title, so title HTML, content HTML, then an array of buttons. Okay, so this right here is allowing you to, call the function. For example, if we say show modal and we say sample modal title, okay, for the content we can say paragraph, I am the content of this modal. Okay, then as a third argument we can pass through an array of buttons. So the way the buttons are going to work, because of course you can specify your buttons as you go. So this default got it button isn't always going to be there. You can customize these and you can basically do whatever you want with these buttons. Okay, so with that being said, that's why it's going to take in an array here, because you can specify as many buttons as you want to appear on the bottom section of your modal. So for example, to have a got it button, we can specify a new object inside here to represent a single button. And we're going to say label is going to be got it. Okay. Then a second property called callback. This right here is going to run. So basically, this is going to be a function which runs when the user clicks the button. Okay. We can just say, for example, console.log, the button was clicked. Okay. Alternatively, you can call this onClick. In fact, you know what? OnClick is better. It makes more sense. So let's make this onClick. This function is going to run. Okay. Then the last property here for the button is going to be called trigger close, and this is going to be equal to true. So basically, if your button has the trigger close property set to true, when you click on the button, it's going to close the modal. Okay, so they don't always do this. For example, if you want your button to not close it, you can say false inside here. But we're going to get to these specifics. Let's just keep this right here as our example usage of the modal window. Okay, so of course, saving this right here and going back in the browser, refreshing, we have nothing because of course the HTML has been commented out. So now let's work on the JavaScript function right here to make everything appear and work. So the first step inside this show modal function is going to be to create a new constant called modal equal to document.createElement. Going to pass in here the div. So basically, this modal represents this main modal div right up here. With that being said, we then need to say modal.classList.add. We're going to give this the class of modal. Okay. Next up, we can say modal.innerHTML is equal to, then we can simply copy and paste the HTML from the inner modal right inside here. So let's copy all of this stuff, go back in the JavaScript and just paste it right down here. Also keep in mind that I'm using template strings, the little backticks near the 1 on your keyboard. So with this, with this being used, I can have multi-line JavaScript strings, and also I can pass through variables inside my text. For example, we can replace this modal title with a $, and then using curly braces, pass through here the title HTML, which was submitted by the developer, yourself most likely. Okay, so the same goes for the content. Let's just get rid of all of our sample content, replace it with the content HTML, which was added through our function property right up here. Okay, or our function parameter right up here. Okay, then for the buttons, we're going to simply make this an empty element for now, and then add them right down here. But first, I just want to stop here, relax a bit, and just say document.body.append child. We're going to be adding the modal, which we just created, to the body, so we can see that this right here is actually working. We're going to save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and as we can see, we've got the modal appearing inside the HTML. Obviously, the close button doesn't work, and the buttons down here aren't appearing, but it's a good first step. So now, let's go back inside here and add this button to our bottom section and actually make the close button in the top right corner work. Alright, so let's go down here. We're going to be saying for each button in our list of provided buttons right up here. For each button, we're going to be creating a new constant called element equal to document.createElement. We're going to be creating a new button element using JavaScript. Then we're going to be saying element.setAttribute, give this a type of button like we did right up here in this button. So type of button right there. Also, let's give this an element.classList.add. Let's give this a class of modal __ button to, of course, give us our CSS styles, which we added right down here. Now, the next step is going to be to add our button label to our button element. So we can say element.textContent is equal to button.label. Remember, each one of these button constant right up here represents a single object you pass in. So of course, button.label refers to this one right here. Okay? Let's now go right down here. We're going to be saying modal.querySelector. We're going to say modal __ bottom. Okay? Then say append child. We're going to be adding to our bottom section of the modal the button element right there. So of course, simply targeting this bottom section and adding in that button. If I save this, go back in the browser, refresh, we have this right here. The label is appearing on the button. The last thing to do for our button right here is going to be to make this on-click actually work. So down here, we're going to say element.addEventListener, going to listen for the click event on our button, and we're going to say when the user clicks on the button, we're going to check for the trigger close property. So we're going to say if button.triggerClose, then we can say document.body.removeChild. We're going to remove the modal which we created. Okay, so this main modal, we're going to remove it from the body of our document, effectively closing the modal. Okay, that's only if trigger close is equal to true. Then down below, we're always going to run our onClick. We're going to say button.onClick. Then that's going to call the onClick function which you provide in, but also we're going to just pass through the modal to our function, which means that in this onClick, we can just say modal, and we have access to the modal itself. This might be useful, if you're looking at input fields on the modal, whatever it might be, it's simply to help you out. So it's not required, but you can pass it in. Okay, so now let's save this, go back in the browser, refresh, then click on the got it, and we see right here we get the button was clicked, and also of course it is gone from the page. So we know that our trigger close has worked. If we make this false, go back, refresh, click on it, we don't get that close of the button, sorry, of the modal. So now the very last step is going to be to make this close button in the top right corner work. So for this, going back inside here, let's say modal.querySelector. We're going to select the modal __ what's it called, close. So for the close button, we're going to say addEventListener, listen for the click event. When the user clicks on the close button, of course, we need to run the exact same code as we did right up here, which is to document body remove child and pass through the modal. Save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we can see upon clicking on the close button, it's gonna go away. There we go, guys. So it's basically done. I just want to show you real quickly what happens if we provide two buttons right down here. So we can just say something like I decline, something like this, right? So let's just make this decline. Okay, now we can just say here declined, save this, go back in the browser, refresh, and we have our two buttons right there. As we can see though, we've got some problems with some spacing. Okay, so if I just go back in the CSS, it's going to be a really simple fix. Okay, we're going to say this right here. We're going to say modal button, not last of type, or let's just say last child. So every button which is not the last button, we're going to say margin left of the gap. Okay, save this, back in the browser, refresh, and that's interesting because not every button is going to be, oh, there we go. It needs to be margin right. Let's try it again, save this, back in the browser, refresh, and we have our gap right there. So that is how to create a modal window using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.